excited to be sharing with you a webinar called Sharing the Road with Slow-Moving Vehicles. So as we get started, I'm going to close out these polls that are on the outside of our webinar screen. It looks like most of you are joining us in as an individual, but there are several of you that are in groups. When we move over to the next slide, I will go ahead and give you some further instructions for how to pass along the names and emails of the people who are in your group. It also looks like today we have a good range of agencies with us. We have about 19% from other federal, state, or local government agency, about 15% of first response agencies, so we welcome you. We have 14% local transportation departments and about 10% state transportation departments as well today. And then we do have about 28% of private consultants and 7% of university staff as well. We have a good range from across the country as well. We have about 30% from the Midwest, the Northeast, and the Southeast, and then about 13% from the West. And mostly you are all joining us by computer only, but there are a few of you joining us by phone as well. So as you know, for all of our webinars, we do have everyone muted, and this is for quality of the recording. If for some reason you do encounter any issues listening through your computer only, we would encourage you to dial in. The phone number can be found in the top left-hand corner of your screen. Sometimes, especially if you're on Wi-Fi, the internet connection will mess with the audio a little bit. So that would be our first step. But we do have a technical person on our webinar as well, and you can feel free to reach out to her through the chat pod if you do have any issues that you'd like help with. So I'm going to move us over to our presentation now. Just a few logistics for all of you. Our webinar will be about an hour and a half long. As I mentioned, it is recorded and will be available on our website in about a week. For quality of that recording, we have muted you for the presentation. If you are listening on the phone, we would ask you to please mute your computer audio. Otherwise, you will hear feedback on your end. To maximize the presentation for times when there are pictures or tables that you'd like to see bigger, you can use the 4 arrows that press outward on the top right-hand corner of your screen. That will make the PowerPoint itself full screen and get rid of everything else around the outside so that you can see it a little bit bigger. At the end of each of our sections, which we will have 4 of today, there will be time for question and answer, as well as some poll questions that we will be asking you as well. There is also a handout pod at the bottom of the screen in the left-hand corner. You can download a PDF of today's presentation from there if you are interested in that. I did skip over as well for the question and answer section. All of those questions will be asked through the chat pod, so you can feel free to put those questions in there at any time. When we do stop, I will read them out for our trainer today so that he can answer those, but don't feel like you have to wait until we get to a question and answer section to put those in. For those of you who are joining us in a group, if you could please send a list of names and email addresses to us at info@ruralsafetycenter.org, we would appreciate that. We'll use that list not only to know how many people joined us today, but also so that we can send you follow-up surveys. There will be 2. And this is how we gauge how well we're doing with our webinars, but also so that we can provide you with certificates of completion and CEUs. Again, we will send that survey, the first one out directly following today's webinar, but so that you also have the link in case your emails get caught in your junk folder. The survey link can now be seen on your screen, and this is also available in that handout that I mentioned in the left-hand corner. That survey will close 2 weeks after the webinar, so you can expect your certificate and the form you need to fill out for CEUs about 3 to 4 weeks after the webinar. The CEU form must be returned to continuinged@montana.edu, which is a department within Montana State University, and not to the Safety Center, as that is all handled through Montana State for us. You can also request a verification of completion form if you're using this to turn in for your licensing, and the picture now shown on the bottom right-hand corner is what you'll be provided that will tell you how many CEUs you've acquired and from which webinars that you got them from. On the left-hand side, you can see the form that we'll have you fill out that will email to you. That does say that it is free to get these CEUs, just so that you know as well. So for today's presenter, we are very honored to have Sheriff Ron Spike with us today. Sheriff Spike has been in law enforcement for 47 years and the last 27 years as the elected sheriff of Yates County, New York, operating a full-service agency with county police, corrections, and 911 dispatchers. He is the chairman of the New York State Municipal Police Training Council. He is on the executive board of the National Sheriff's Association and is a frequent instructor for sheriffs and other elected officials in New York State on contemporary public safety administrative topics. Yates County has approximately 3,000 old order Mennonites within its population, also grape growing for wineries and agricultural commerce. So Sheriff has a lot of experience with the slow-moving vehicles, and we're very excited to have him with us today to talk about them. The goal of the webinar today: once you have completed this webinar, you will have an overview of slow-moving vehicles, related issues to include agricultural vehicles, horse and buggies, bicycles, parade, and parade funeral vehicles. We have a few learning outcomes for you today. To achieve the webinar goal, you will learn to have an awareness of the plain people culture and population centers in the U.S., to identify the various slow-moving vehicle types and their vulnerabilities to crashes, to value the slow-moving vehicle operator's responsibilities to transportation safety, to appreciate the importance of the slow-moving vehicle triangle emblem display. Sheriff will also provide a case review of a major slow-moving vehicle crash that killed and injured several people. You'll learn to recognize law enforcement challenges with various slow-moving vehicle operations, investigations, and legal definitions. And lastly, to understand the impact of traffic control devices and slow-moving crash investigations. So at this point, I am going to make sure that, Sheriff, that you're unmuted, and make sure that you see those arrow keys right below the presentation so that you can go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon.
Perfect.
Thank you all for your interest in slow-moving vehicles and some of the challenges that come with that. Today, we want to talk about the theme of sharing the road, especially with slow-moving vehicles and other related issues that go along with that. So often, the focus nowadays tends to be on speed, seatbelt enforcement, distracted driving, drunk and impaired driving, and various equipment issues, including airbags and tires and that type of thing. But we don't hear an awful lot about slow-moving vehicles, or SMVs as we refer to. And so I want to talk a little bit today about the vehicle and traffic law, and some of it will pertain to New York State and some with other areas, some enforcement challenges, some definitions, how to do some of these investigations that are unique, the culture, especially of the old order Mennonites and some of the Amish sects that are out there, and particularly we'll spend a lot of time on horse-drawn issues, and we're going to include bicycles, farm tractors, and some other ag equipment, funerals, and parades as we go along. Sharing the road, of course, is the major theme dealing with slow-moving vehicles, and it becomes ever challenging with the various types of ag equipment that are on the road, and these horse-drawn buggies and bicycles and everything else occupying the highways. And so I want to let you know where I'm from. Yates County is located in the heart of the Finger Lakes region. It's in kind of central western New York State, and again, as I said, we have a few thousand old order Mennonites, mostly some Amish, in this area, so we're quite knowledgeable of issues involving them. I was sent this from one of the seminars that I had given in this state. One of the young actual old order Mennonite folks who must have been computer savvy sent me this and asked me if this was my agency, and it kind of made me chuckle that they were aware of that type of thing. Let's talk about the migration of the plain people and what it's done to how that population relates to us. most all the Mennonites and Amish have originally came from the Lancaster County area in Pennsylvania, and they like to call themselves the Plain People. And it's farmland that drives the migration. It's always farmland, and they're always looking for less expensive farmland. And they're finding that in other states, and whether they're coming up to New York State or going farther out in Pennsylvania or Ohio or going out west into Indiana, Illinois, and we're seeing a lot more in the Michigan area now. The language that's often spoke is what they call Low German, Pennsylvania Dutch, and they like to refer to the U.S. citizens, if you will, as the English, as the Americans type of name that they like to give us. One of the things that understanding this culture and the diversity with this culture is the simple lives that they live and let live attitude. And so one of the things I can recommend that has helped us is having a relationship with the bishop, because the bishop is the head of the church district and is really responsible for administering a lot of the discipline that goes along with the church. Everything evolves around that church. And so if you can have a relationship with a bishop, it can go a long ways to helping deal with this culture. This is a particular good slide to help understand where these people reside. And the Old Order Amish slide here focuses on where these churches and where the religions are placed. I got this from the Association of Religious Data Archives, believe it or not, and you can see across the state that New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Ohio, and up into Michigan and Wisconsin are pretty relevant areas, and it gives you a good guide as to where these people are living, as to where the churches are located, and the thing to understand about buggy crashes, which I think is really important, is more than half of these incidents are happening in the daylight, and normally on straight roadways as well, and oftentimes at intersections. And one of the most relevant statistics that we can come up with is 80% occur as rear-end crashes. And 84% of the time there's no adverse weather conditions. And the typical cause of these types of accidents is, of course, following too closely. And another relevant thing that some may not understand is that a typical buggy, it will cost over $3,000, and a typical horse may cost more than $2,000 as well. So those are kind of approximate costs that are involved for these types of things. And you know, one of the headlines that we see, which was one of the recent ones, a Wisconsin headline where a drunken driver has killed a buggy operator and his son. And what's interesting dealing with this population is that they will have an attitude that it was God's will, and not animosity towards the offender. So it's something that a lot of people have a hard time understanding, but when you get to know them, you can understand it. The congregations by state shows Ohio to have the largest congregation, Pennsylvania, and then followed by Indiana, and the other states follow, as you can see. Those three states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, have the most horse-drawn conveyances on the highways. And so it's a good thing to know when you're dealing with this type of culture. 65% of all traffic deaths occur in rural areas, and 50% of those deaths are on county roads, according to some reports that we have gotten. Ohio reported 120 buggy crashes in 1 year alone. Now, finding out statistics on slow-moving vehicles, whether it be a buggy or a tractor or whatever, is a very challenging thing. And so been able to get some slides out of NHTSA and some other slides from the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles from the state I'm in, but it is very limited, and so it can be very challenging. It appears from what we can find out that Illinois may be the only state that requires buggy registration. I know my state does not. Ohio is going to, but the Amish actually rallied against it, and so that can become an issue because it is another traffic unit, as you know. One of the things that they had some issues with, as the Ohio folks reported to us, law enforcement reported, was something called rumspringa, which is a rite of passage. It means jumping and hopping around, that type of thing. And there was they related some issues where the law enforcement tried to stop a buggy, and oftentimes they would ditch it and run into the fields and that type of thing. One of the relevant things you need to know, because from time to time these horse and buggies do get loose and take off. They become untied or whatever. 99% of the time we have found that the horse will normally take the buggy back home, and that's where it ends up, or it'll go to a familiar place as to where it's been before. So it's something good to know if you have to chase one down. One of the things that is clearly understood with this culture is they do understand money and being fined. They don't like to pay a tow bill, and so if you take strict enforcement there, you can have some control and create the idea that there is enforcement. Some of the places that we have had good luck with discussing safety issues with this culture is at farm auctions. A lot of them will show up and be there, and if you can work out with the coordinator ahead of time, especially with the bishop, they'll actually give you a time to talk safety, and we have done issues like that. It's a good opportunity to take advantage of that. We've had others involved from the EMTs and other safety issues, and especially if they get a free meal out of the event, they will listen to you, and it's a good place to visit if you're in law enforcement for safety.
Thank you, Sheriff. And at this time, we are going to stop and see if anyone has any questions. You can type those into the chat pod on the left-hand side. And while we are waiting to see if there are any questions, I'm going to move us over to our first poll break. So our first question for all of you in the audience is, true or false, the best ways to open up communications with the Amish Mennonites are to create a relationship with their bishop and to attend farm equipment auctions? So the answers are true, false, I don't know, or I don't remember. We'll just give everyone a few seconds here to fill that out. And again, if you do have any questions for Sheriff so far, you can type those in to the chat pod on the left-hand side. Okay, Sheriff, it looks like everyone has answered so far. So I'm going to let you go ahead and talk about that question.
Yes, that certainly is correct, and as I had said, it's very good to have this relationship with the bishop, and we found that the heads of law enforcement, especially the sheriff and even the state police, to actually visit and get acquainted. And they can be a big help to you to educating and making individuals apply to some of the laws that are applicable.
Perfect. I am going to move us back over to the presentation. It does look like we have a couple of questions that are being typed in. And if they come through in the next couple of seconds, I will read those out. Otherwise, we will go ahead and move on to the next section. I'm going to go ahead and have you move on, Sheriff, and then when we stop for the next question and answer, we'll go back and answer those two questions that are currently being typed in.
Sure, sure. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about other types of slow-moving vehicles as well. And just as historical for this state, uh, in 2008, the governor at the time did do a major modification to our state laws on slow-moving vehicles, which took effect in 2009, and that was because there was a farm tractor that was involved in a major motor vehicle accident, and that's why it turned out to be a change in all of our laws that way. I will talk later. My county is rather infamous, if you will. We had a major accident in 2011 where we had 6 people killed as a result of a SMV type of incident. So I'll get into that later. Now, as I said, crash data and statistical information is very hard to come up with. And to continue the buggy thing here for a little bit more, there was some article out of Pennsylvania that talked about 23 were killed in this decade from '07 to 16, according to the Department of Transportation in an article that they come out with earlier this year. And there were 633 crashed during this time period, and this number continues to go up. Most of the old order Mennonites and Amish follow the laws, but yet there are still some that make compliance very challenging. There are different SECTS is the word, sex, and or clans or what have you that do have a hard time with some of these laws, and that can be a very challenging time when if you hit with that. And as far as the statistics go, the one thing I want to remind here is that we've tried to suggest that on some of these accident reports that we're required to fill out, if there was only simply a little box that someone could check that an SMV was involved, it would really help considerably with the statistical information that's available out there. Now, in the United States, fatal crashes, some information that NHTSA gave me from their FARS program, they could break down some information with animal-drawn units involved in accidents and crashes over that same period of time. And the numbers are fairly consistent. And over that time, you had 137 crashes and 158 fatalities, according to their statistics. In our state, in New York, I could say within the last 5 years, what we could pull out of our state Department of Motor Vehicles was we had a trend that's going upward on the total number of crashes and the numbers of fatalities that have occurred in the last 5 years. And that upward trend is very concerning as to what's going on here. Sharing the road gets to be a little bit more of a challenge. And some of the stats that we could pull off of our reports, which were limited, 70% were struck from behind, again. 90% of these accidents were during the daytime, and 100% of the time, if there was a fatality involved, it was indeed the operator of the SMV. And within this chart, the other vehicle would be the horse-drawn buggy unit, and the farm tractor, of course, speaks to itself. There's other types of vehicles that were involved in this chart as well. The number of fatal crashes involving farm equipment, no trucks involved, NHTSA was able to provide me that information over that same 10-year period. And again, in red there, you can see my county stuck out where we had the 6 killed. And frankly, that incident in 2011, which I'm going to talk about later in this presentation, is one of the reasons that got my interest involved in the slow-moving vehicles. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the importance here of this slide. And Everything on the left we know is enforcement. The black and white signs, they can be enforced. Someone can be charged with violating that type of thing. But the signs on the right, which are the yellow warning signs, are all considered to be traffic control devices, regardless of what state you're in. And these are signs, signals, and markings. Even markings on the highway is a traffic control device. And it's really important, I think, to understand the purpose for regulating, warning, and guiding traffic, because with the presence of these types of things, it can really aid in your investigation of an incident involving a slow-moving vehicle especially. And I will come back to this slide towards the end of this presentation and connect that together. These slow-moving vehicle issues, especially with tractors, we've had people put signboards out on the highways to try to remind people that farm tractors are operating on the highway. And we've posted many of these warning share the road signs with horse and buggy issues, and oftentimes, depending upon what the old order Mennonites or Amish are going to, you could have 15, 18 of these buggies operating at the same time, and can really cause a lot of congestion on the highways. This is probably one of the most important slides that we're going to view today, and I want to concentrate on the fact that the vehicle that's coming up from behind is traveling at 55 miles an hour. In this slide, it happens to be a truck that's there. And we're talking about a 400-foot distance between the vehicle that it's coming up on. Now, the passenger car going 45 miles an hour, that truck covered that. It takes 27 seconds to catch up to it, 27 seconds. But look at the farm tractor that's going 15 miles an hour. The time to cover that 400 feet is 7 seconds. And then we go to the 7-mile-an-hour average speed of a horse and buggy, and now we're down to 5.7 seconds, and a bicycle 4 seconds. So it's very obvious that the closure time is so fast when you come up behind these type of slow-moving vehicles that the reaction time does not often allow, depending upon the speed of the vehicle that's closing in on them, time to get stopped and or to slow down, and thus the statistic of the majority of these accidents are rear-end collisions. Let's just look at a few of these collisions here for a moment. Here's one in January of 2018, this year, where here's another buggy and horse that was collided from the rear. Now, what we see oftentimes is, depending upon the shape of the motor vehicle or the vehicle that struck the a horse and buggy, as an example, if it's a smaller car or a sloped front end, oftentimes the car will actually go underneath the buggy and raise the buggy right up in the air. The people are often catapulted out, and then sometimes the vehicle will then come in contact with a horse. If it's a SUV type of vehicle and it slams into the rear, then it often just drives right through it, and it turns into rubble. There was an accident just last fall up in Michigan, where 3 kids were killed and 6 people were hurt. These are the type of headlines that we often see with these types of accidents. This particular horse happened to survive the crash, but oftentimes they don't. Again, speed was a contributing factor, and even when the roads are straight, it seems to be a contributing factor with these types of accidents. Here's one that was in St. Lawrence County, New York, where people were catapulted out into a wooded area, and you can see the damage that was caused to the car. This is one we had in our county, where we had a 20-year-old school teacher on her way to one of our schools to teach in the morning, and a pickup truck slammed into the rear of the vehicle. The buggy actually went up over the side of it, and the truck then collided with the horse. It did kill the horse in this particular incident. The girl did survive. The driver claims sun glare was the issue. Now, at the time of day that accident took place, we did go back out there the very next morning, and at the very time of the accident to see if sun glare could have been an issue. And obviously, he was being truthful. It's very possible it could have been a contributing factor to the accident. Nevertheless, another rear-end collision. Here's one we had again last fall in my county, where we had a vehicle where the operator was actually ejected off this wagon type of thing the old order Mennonite was operating, and he was ejected some 50 feet out into a field and actually walked away from that accident. And we had a 20-year-old student who we had to issue some traffic tickets for speed not reasonable due to special hazard. Well, the special hazard was not only this type of traffic, but the signage up on that roadway that would indicate that you needed to be aware of that type of thing could exist. And I want to talk about this education a little bit too here later on. One of the things that's very relevant that we have to remember is that there's a burden placed upon the operator of the farm equipment or on the horse-drawn equipment itself operating on that public highway. They too must follow the rules of the road, if you will. And when you have operators that may want to cut across traffic, or operate in too far out into the road, or operate without slow-moving buggy signs, it can cause issues. You know, when it comes to turning and signaling and that type of thing, passing, obeying speed limits, you know, drug and alcohol laws, you wouldn't think we'd have to worry about it with this type of community, but we are seeing that we have to. And so it's very concerning. Speed is not normally an issue, but again, here's a historical tidbit that where one of our President Grant was actually pulled over for speeding and paid a fine. So it's one of those facts that come out with slow-moving vehicles at times. So depending upon what the operation is, they have to abide by the law. And we see everything. We're seeing more and more issues where we're not have the slow-moving emblem on. We operate in the wintertime. We've had people clinging to the back of a buggy on skates and that type of thing. Other issues that are starting to come up is in Cattaraugus County, which is in far west New York State. They had here's a headline where Amish youth was operating the horse and buggy, and he was under the influence of alcohol. And so there you have I guess instead of DWI, you have a BWI, what have you. But it does show that the community, some of the younger people, are engaged in that type of thing. These are other issues that we've seen. It was reported to me on drag racing, where two buggies and younger operators decided they were going to race each other up a road. And that can be a very dangerous thing, skating nearby and operating, young operators. That's another issue on the age of the operator. And I understand there's some video out there with somebody actually skiing behind a horse and buggy. Towing is becoming a trend that we've seen more and more of, where they're towing boats and trailers behind a buggy. And again, slow-moving vehicles, towing a kite, other distractions that could be out there. So there's a variety of issues that can happen. And again, these accidents can be really a lot of seen where parts and pieces and these buggies get completely destroyed, and these poor animals are getting skidded down the highway or are found dead in the highway, and they can be very challenging. Again, there's not a whole lot to look at or deal with when we're dealing with this type of accident. These types of accidents are also can occur within a city where you may have tourists riding in a buggy. But here again is a good example of how the shape of this motor vehicle that collided with the rear went underneath it. And so it gives a good example of how when you want to reenact what might have happened and reconstruct what happened, often that's a good start to see how the buggy was knocked up into the air, what have you. But when these trucks strike them, they just totally destroy altogether. The other thing to understand is that anytime these buggies are in accidents, we have to call out a roll-top flatbed wrecker. A normal wrecker with a hook will not suffice to tow these types of accidents away and to be able to pick up all the debris that's in the road. The burden is on the wrecker operator to clear the road of all those debris. And now we're coming upon another pod.
Perfect. Thank you again. And I am going to move us over to the next poll question. Again, you can type any of those questions that you have in over on the left-hand side in our chat pod. Our next question for the audience is, which of the following statements are correct? Slow-moving vehicle crashes are increasing. Vehicle and traffic rules apply to the slow-moving vehicle operators as well. To gather better slow-moving vehicle data, you should advocate to add slow-moving vehicle box to your crash report. A roll-top flatbed wrecker will be needed to remove a damaged buggy. All of the above, none of the above, or I don't know, I don't remember. And Sheriff, while we are waiting for those answers, a few comments that came in rather than questions. One of our audience members has said that Louisiana does have horse-drawn buggies, but they're not sure if they're registered or not, and that New Orleans has jazz funerals where they use a horse-drawn hearse. So that's when you get to that part of the discussion will be of interest to them as well. And then someone else did mention that the bicycle speeds are normally around 12 miles per hour, so closure collision time on the slide that you provided looks a little bit too low. Someone else felt that bicycles typically travel between 5 and 25 miles per hour, depending on skill level, fitness, type of bike, and percent grade of road. So those are just a couple of comments for you that came in.
Correct.
It does look like everyone has gotten a chance to vote, so I have closed that and broadcast the results for you as well.
Okay, very good. Yes, the bicycle speeds can be higher than that, and so I appreciate that feedback. As far as the other things with horses go, I'll cover some of that here a little later on.
Okay, if you want to go ahead and address the poll question, it's closed and the results are broadcast for you now.
Yes, that poll question is correct, and that it does take a flatbed wrecker to remove that type of debris, and again, the wrecker operator is responsible for clearing the debris from the highway.
Okay, perfect. And along those same questions, we had a question come in, or along those same lines, a question come in the chat pod. Who inspects the cleanup? That's a problem for all crash sites, little or no inspection to ensure a clean surface or safe for cyclists.
Well, normally the law enforcement agency that's in charge of the accident investigation is the agency that makes sure that the highway is at least clear. If you're on rural roads where it's a town or a county type of road, then those highway department superintendents can also help you with that kind of an inspection to make sure that everything is safe. On the state roads, of course, the State Department of Motor Vehicles can have someone also come out. But the actual paved portion or the normal portion where you operate this vehicle, it's the wrecker operator that's responsible for that removal.
Perfect, thank you. And one more question came in, and I'm not sure if you'd like to answer this now or wait until the next section, because I know you will address it there. But the question is bicycle safety outreach a good way to make inroads into the Amish and Mennonite communities?
Yes, it is, and I will cover that here a little later on.
Okay, perfect. And Laura, again, with the who takes care of removing the dead horse, that will also be covered in the next section as well. So I'm going to move us back over to the presentation so Sheriff can address section 3. There you go, Sheriff.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the lighting requirements on these vehicles drawn by animals, and I think it's important that we understand, you know, about the slow-moving vehicle emblem, or in some cases, especially in some states, a lighted lantern can also suffice for that purpose. In New York State, especially, and this applies to some other states, not all states are the same. In our state, the SMV triangle emblem is what's required. There is an exception for a lighted lantern that would normally hang off the side of the unit. Will also suffice within the law. Again, we certainly need those reflectors on there to actually show up at night. And here's a photo of the same buggy with a lantern on it during the day, and then how the reflectors tape can make such a huge difference at night to make those things show up. Some of the other things that have been experimented with is the different types of tapes. There's even black reflective tape and other types of tape on some of these clans of Amish that just simply will not use that emblem. And of course, what we're fortunate with in our area here is that lower slide to the right is how most of our old order Mennonite buggies go down the road with flashing red lights and tape and the emblems as well. And we've had good luck educating our folks that that's what we want to see. Again, they're not willing to apply that emblem. Some of them aren't. Some of them will change it to a black type of. They'll have the emblem, but it certainly isn't orange, and that type of thing. What happens there is many of them feel that the orange is what they refer to as the devil's colors, and so they don't want to use them. We have had some talks with some of these groups on at least putting the white reflective tape on so that we can have some safety reflection going on. We reached out to a bishop out in Ohio who said that they're just used to getting hit by cars anyway, so why put the emblem on? And of course that's something that we don't like to hear, but safety is what we're trying to promote here, especially when we're looking at rear-end collisions. One of the issues that comes up is that there's really no religious exemption to any of these vehicle and traffic laws. I think there's some tolerance in some areas. There's some agreements that have been made on enforcement and that type of thing, but there's truly no real religious exemption on some of this. So, but we try to promote and work with the bishops on getting them into compliance. As I understand it, here a few years ago in Kentucky, they actually changed some of their law there regarding this triangle, the slow-moving vehicle triangle, that now allows for them to just use gray or reflective tape instead of the triangle. And again, we go back to the devil's colors as some of them feel. And so Some other states have been approached on that, but have not allowed for any kind of exemption to exist. Let's move to farm tractors here for a second, and talk about signaling that's required. You know, you've got the hand signals, which they're required to do when they want to turn. If they don't have turning signals on the vehicle, and you have left, right, that type of thing with the hand straight up in the air, and they're required to do that when they turn. The same with the open buggy. The open buggy operator needs to use hand signals as well, and so it's important that they do that. So what we found, I think this is important. We did a modified version of a slow-moving vehicle presentation, and I've had my school resource officer go into the school and talk to driver's ed classes regarding slow-moving vehicles, specifically farm tractors and horse and buggies. And you know, if we hadn't done that, they won't not get this education any other way as to those closure times and the slow-moving vehicle emblem and that type of thing. So other states may operate differently, but we've had great success with educating our young people that are learning to drive with the laws that apply to SMVs, and so it's something to consider for jurisdictions that haven't thought of doing that. Okay, we'll talk about that SMV sign a little bit. I think it's important to understand that for any vehicle that travels less than 25 miles an hour, any motorized vehicle or any horse-drawn vehicle that travels less, that sign is required to be on the back of it, and the ones that don't have it on, really, you can come up on them very quickly, and you don't have any idea that the vehicle in front of you is going that slow. They are required to have it on all units, and some don't understand that. We've had to educate several that I see you have it on the tractor. That's wonderful, but you have to have it on each unit. Is the way the law is applied here. It comes under, most states have agricultural vehicle equipment requirements, and you know, all of this machinery that operates this way with a legal definition have to have that sign on them. And again, the commissioners have rules and regulations that deal with that, and we have to make sure that they're following those rules and where they're to be mounted and that type of thing. The mounting of it has to be fastened securely. It can't be just hung on there with a wire or by a tape. It should be in the center, and that type of thing. It must be kept clean. There's visibility issues that have to be out there, especially at night. And again, there's certain regulations regarding the warning that it provides. Something that we're very concerned about is using the slow-moving vehicle emblem and mounting it on fixed positions like mailboxes and driveway posts. We're starting to see more and more of that, and in New York State, that's actually a violation of law, and we're encouraging law enforcement to at least notify homeowners that that is illegal and they should take it down. There's other types of warning and reflectors that can be used for that purpose, but when you start to use a slow-moving vehicle emblem inappropriately like this, the actual legal use for it becomes not as relevant. So I think it's important that we try to make sure that people don't misuse this emblem for what it's originally used for. I'll turn a little bit here, and we'll talk about bicycles here for a second. At our fair entrance, it's not uncommon for us to see 100, 200 bicycles at our county fair, and so bicycles are used by this community quite a bit, and by others. It's a main way of transportation between the Amish and the Mennonite communities, and so it's one of those things that we have to be very cognizant of, that we're going to see out a lot. The bonnet or the hat that the Old Order Mennonites or Amish wear is considered a religious symbol. And even my congressman has told me that it's a federal exemption. Have I seen that in writing? No, but okay, I respect that. There's sections in the Bible that talk about these types of things. And so we encourage its use. However, it's one of those issues that is not as enforceable as one might hope it would be. The bicycle issues are more than just this community. We're having lots of bicycle events where you have multiple individuals riding these bikes, and speeds can get up to my gosh, a lot faster than the 5, 7, 8 miles an hour. It's normally it can be up to around 20, 25 miles an hour with some of these, especially going downhill as far as speed goes. We've had a recent bicycle accident. We had a white pickup truck strike one, and the bicycle operator actually went right into a barbed wire fence on a rural road. And thank goodness she had a helmet on at the time, so that made a big difference. But bicycle accidents are very concerning to us, especially with this community. And we actually reached out to the National Safety Council and picked up some manuals on bike safety, and we have 23 schools in our county relevant to the Old Order Mennonites, and the bishops have allowed us to come into 18 of those 23 schools and actually do bicycle safety education to this population and talk about all the safety aspects on operating a bicycle and so forth. And here's a picture of one of the deputies showing the different parts of a bike, the safety, and we actually take about 90 minutes and go through a whole PowerPoint and a video. And what we've found is that the actual parents of all these students at the time, knowing we're coming, will actually come out to the school that day as well. And so we've had great success in reducing our bicycle accident issues by educating the young people. These types of accidents with bikes that we've seen in the past have really caused some serious injury, and we've had some deaths as well. So it's something to think about if you haven't done anything like that. One of the unique things we've had, and I talked earlier about the buggy operator that had been drinking. Well, we had an incident here a while back where we had two Mennonite youth at 2 o'clock in the morning. They collided at an intersection when it was very dark out, and one was intoxicated. And so again, that was the contributing factor in that crash. And so you got to be very aware that some of the younger folks in this community are doing things like that. Again, on a typical Sunday, and you could probably find this in most counties that have churches, this is a typical Sunday in my county. And again, there's probably going to be over 200 bicycles that are near the church. And so they tend to all leave at the same time, and we have some real concerning issues on safety when that actually happens. Some of the other vehicles that are involved with slow moving can be ATVs and UTVs, all-terrain types of vehicles. Oftentimes these are operated off the road, and that's okay. If they do decide to get on the highway, they can cause some issues if they don't follow the rules of the road as well. And that can include even golf carts. Some communities are having a lot more problems with golf carts operating on the highways than others. But it's something you have to be aware of and try to get a control on. The tractors can be another issue, and we'll talk about that for a minute here. The slide on the lower left is a typical Amish farmer. They use a horse to draw all their equipment, if you will. Here he is plowing. Now, the slide to the far right is your typical old order Mennonite farmer who don't believe in rubber tires, as the picture in the middle shows, like a normal tractor that we see every day by our farmers uses. The old order Mennonite will not believe in rubber tires, and they'll operate with steel wheels. And that can be an issue in itself, frankly. And then on the upper right of this slide, you'll see what we call lugs, these steel lugs, and they too can be an issue. And I will address that here in a couple of slides that are coming up. Oftentimes, when we have tractors that are involved in typical accidents, they tend to break apart right where the engine and the transmission come together. Often break in that area. We've seen it several times with different accidents involving tractors. Here again, no SMV sign on that tractor involved in that collision. Another farm tractor in Madison County, New York. Again, you can see where the tractor collapsed from the collision. This is an interesting case that we had that involved an old order Mennonite family and friends. This occurred on a Sunday, and they took this farm tractor with the steel wheels on it, hooked it up to a farm hay wagon, and was doing a hay ride. Came down a very steep hill, and you can see in the lower left slide, you can see the skid marks from the gearing down of the tractor and the wheel trying to keep up with the tractor, and the tractor is going faster than the wheel wants to turn, which then caused the vehicle to go sideways. This was fairly new macadam when this happened as well. So when it finally did go off the road towards the bottom of this steep hill, one woman was ejected and hit her head on a stone and was killed. And then the tractor went on down the road and separated. We ended up charging the operator with multiple traffic violations because this farm tractor and wagon unit was intended for agricultural purposes. It was not intended to be used for recreation or this type of activity. The bishop of the church involved here was very upset as well because here we had a recreational type event which was occurring on a Sunday, which was not according to their rules as well. And so this particular event, the tractor turned out to be an unregistered vehicle, uninsured, brakes and everything else because they changed it from what it was intended to be used for. And that's something you have to be very aware of when it comes to the definition of motor vehicles, especially the definitions within your laws. And the typical laws say that a motor vehicle shall exclude farm-type tractors and all-terrain types of vehicles because they're supposed to be used exclusively for agricultural purposes. And when that doesn't take place, then you have you have those issues I just explained. And again, there's no minimum age for operators, and they are not required to have insurance to be operated on a highway as long as they're being used for agricultural purposes. Some of the other types of vehicles that are considered slow-moving that can be concerning is not only the farm equipment that are wide loads going down the highway, moving very slowly, heavy loads that can collapse a bridge, road machinery equipment, and that type of thing can also be issues that we have to be aware of. A lot of times the issue with these slow-moving vehicles is passing these types of vehicles and can really lead to some reckless operation and tragedy because the drivers just do not have patience, especially when you've got double lines as your traffic control. And oftentimes accidents will occur because they just don't have the patience to get around them. Going back to the steel wheels and lugs on the tractor, I think it's important to understand that many of us here in this state have tried to pass local laws regarding these steel wheels on the highways, and of course it's been determined to be an unconstitutional law for us to enforce. So we have to resort to other ways to deal with that. And so if there is damage done to a highway, under our law and under most states' laws, injuries to highways, the operators can be held responsible, but it's more of a civil issue than it is a criminal type of thing. And they talk about a term called treble. That's T-R-E-B-L-E, treble damages, and that actually means triple. And that a highway superintendent can commence an action for 3 times what the cost of the repair was to deal with those types of things. Okay, the other issues with slow-moving vehicles, especially with the old order Mennonite community, has to do with events that they have, especially on Saturday night. A lot of times you'll have mass gatherings, and they call them sings, and and we'll have a lot of buggy traffic and a lot of bicycle traffic going to these things. They play sports. They sing a cappella with no music, play baseball and what have you. And oftentimes we have had to get them out of the highway, especially if you could come over a hill on a rural road and there would be 200 folks out in the highway, and which we've had a few brakes squeal and some things happen if you don't keep them off the roadway when they're having these types of events and traveling on Saturday night especially. Some other types of related issues with the farm tractors. Here's an issue that comes up from time to time, especially with antique farm tractors and parades, or a highway caravan where they caravan to get to the event. We've tried to encourage these tractor clubs, if you will, to try to trailer their tractor to these parades or to the events, and then when they're operating within the parade itself, they're perfectly legal. And I mean, that's one of the reasons we put a police car in front of a parade to escort, to allow everyone behind it and that's in the parade to be on the highway. However, once again, as we know, the definition of this agricultural type of equipment is intended to be used to do farming and that type of thing. So when you operate it on the road like this, technically you have an unregistered, unlicensed, likely vehicle, no insurance and what have you, because there is no exemption for parades or caravans and that type of thing. So it's something. It's very concerning, and we've had some issues with some clubs trying to make sure that they're very careful. It's not the kind of thing that we enforce on a regular basis. Most law enforcement has some tolerance for this type of thing, but they need to understand that it can be unlawful. Hay rides are another issue that we try to be very concerned about. They get up on a highway. As to the picture on the lower right, then you can have an accident that can take place, and sometimes a lot of people get hurt. Most of the time, these are kept off the highway. But once again, with the accident that I talked about on the hill, you had a tractor hauling a wagon down the public highway, and it was not intended for that purpose. So we have to be very cognizant of the laws in case something happens in that regard. And you see it all the time. When something is off-road, then the vehicle and traffic laws obviously don't apply. Most of the time when we do have an accident involving a trailer being towed by a slow-moving vehicle, then it all has to do with the hitch and the tow chains are not correct, and some of the accidents can be pretty dramatic when things come unhooked or are not hooked up accordingly in the first place. Farm to market traffic is something else that that can be very concerning. We've had issues where other farmers that operate motor vehicles or operate trucks have to pay highway use tax type of thing, whereas the old order Mennonites and the Amish that are going to the same market using horses or tractors to pull the wagon don't have to do that, and we've had some contentions regarding that, and so that traffic. We have a place called the Windmill Farm Market, and in our county, and that operates every Saturday, and 10,000 people can show up there in the morning alone, and the traffic can really get concerning. So be aware of that as well. Funeral processions is another type of slow-moving vehicle that doesn't get a lot of attention, and there's not a lot of talk about it. But however, if you look at stats when you can find them, these types of processions are having more crashes, more so than there ever used to be. And many people think that because we have our headlights on and we're following in type of a caravan fashion, that that obviously laws may not apply to them, but unfortunately laws do apply to them, and so we have to be very careful of that. This is the law in my state that talks about funeral processions. There is nothing, and there's no exceptions to the vehicle and traffic laws, and I think this is probably in most states. The only exceptions are for emergency vehicles. So a funeral procession, in order to be able to disobey a traffic signal or a traffic light, just because you're in line and you're moving slowly and you have your headlights on, doesn't give you really the right to violate that traffic light. There has to be a traffic officer or a flagman or someone there to regulate the traffic who would supersede the light to make that perfectly legal. And so these things happen. We see it every day. But if there was to be an accident, then they're going to be at fault for going through a red light, even though you're in that procession. Again, here's a photograph of the old order Mennonites on their way to a funeral, and when you've got 30, 40 of these horse and buggies on the highway at the same time occupying a lane of road, and other traffic comes up behind it, that too can be very, very concerning. And we're seeing, as someone mentioned earlier, I think it was in Louisiana, they're seeing these larger horse and buggy limos, and I have seen one of these appear here, but they certainly take up a lot of the highway and haul a lot of people. And if one was to get ran into, it would probably be a major accident. The scooters are another issue that's becoming more concerning, that don't travel all that fast. We're seeing more and more, especially older people, that think that they can go right down the highway with them. And again, they're another type of slow-moving vehicle, if you will. Most of them don't exceed that 25 miles an hour issue, but then again, we're seeing them more and more. So it's something else that may have to be regulated more, and everyone needs to be aware of it. And finally, one of the last kind of unique slow-moving vehicles, again, are these antique cars. And many times they're registered as a historical vehicle, so there's not such a problem operating on the roadway. But we're starting to see more and more of them. Some of them don't travel all that fast either, that are actually driven to the event where they're going to be in the parade. So it's another thing to be concerned about as far as regulations go. That takes us to our next chat pod.
Perfect, thank you. And we have one more poll question for you guys again. Let me move us over there. Again, if anyone has questions, please feel free to put those in the chat pod on the left-hand side, and when we break in 1 second, we'll go ahead and answer those. So our question for you this time is, which of the following statements is not correct? There is no religious exemptions to vehicle and traffic laws. In New York State, slow-moving vehicles and sharing the road are included in driver's education. In New York State, it is illegal to place a slow-moving vehicle triangle emblem on a stationary object. There is a federal exemption for Amish Mennonite on bike helmets. All of the above, none of the above, I don't know, or I don't remember. And again, which of these is not correct? Again, Sheriff, we do have a comment in here rather than a question, so I'm going to read that out loud to you right now. It says, in Louisiana, we have sugarcane trailers where tractors pull these on roadways and across railroad tracks, and some have been hit by trains.
Yes, I would imagine that they are lengthy, and that train crossings can be a real problem, especially with a slow-moving vehicle that's crossing when maybe it shouldn't be crossing. And not all of these crossings have controls. It's a concerning thing that the operators have to be very clear that there is no train coming.
Okay, and at this point I have closed the poll and broadcast the results from you. It looks like our results are all over the board, so if you can go ahead and discuss that and let everyone know which was the correct answer.
Well, the answer is regarding in New York State, it is illegal to place a SMV triangle on a stationary object. It's against the law to do that, and so that's one thing that's right. There's no religious exemption. That is correct, and in New York State. There is no driver's education regarding slow-moving vehicles and sharing of the road, and so we've had to do that locally. So that's a concern.
We do have several questions that have come in for you, Sheriff. One of them is there going to be any discussion about engineering solutions to these problems that you've discussed?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about signage towards the end, and that may help partially address that.
And then another question for you. Are antique cars required to have the slow-moving vehicle signs?
No, we haven't required them in this state to have the SMV sign on them at this stage. It's something to consider if the vehicle is old enough where it would actually travel that slow. Now, if you have an antique vehicle that does go less than 25 miles an hour and you have it on the highway, yes, you should have the sign on.
Okay, and again, it does look like we have one more person typing in a question. I'm going to have you go ahead and get started on the next section. We do have one more question and answer period, so we will answer that question when we get to that stopping point.
Sure.
Okay, you should be all set, Sheriff.
All right. One of the issues that come up from time to time in this sharing of the road is the horsepower. And we've had some incidents where a horse has actually gone down and collapsed, still alive, in the middle of a major intersection. And what a concern that causes for local law enforcement to try to get someone in there when the buggy operator can't deal with it, to see what the nearest veterinarian is available, and direct traffic and control traffic around that scene if the horse is unable to get back up. That can be quite a concern. And we have to rely on the buggy operator quite a bit to help us in that regard, or call in especially to get veterinary services there when that does happen. We've had issues where, again, there was an accident that we had where the horse was killed. The horse needed to be, ironically, the horse had to be put out of its euthanized, if you will, at the scene. It was dying there, and here's a law enforcement officer trying to decide whether it needs to dispatch the animal, and lo and behold, a veterinarian pulled up and was able to euthanize the horse right there at the scene. Getting the horse removed from the scene can then again be another challenging issue, depending upon the location, depending upon whether there's a lot of public around that are watching, that type of thing. Very challenging, and oftentimes there can be a rendering service in your community or nearby that can be dispatched out to actually winch and pull the animal into a trailer, or at least in the time that you're waiting to get an animal covered up. We've had tow trucks. We've wrapped nylon straps around and pulled the animal onto a flatbed and then taken it to the Mennonites farm type of thing, and then they can get a rendering service in that way as well. You have to be very sensitive on those types of issues. I want to talk about this infamous accident that we had in our county back in 2011. When the headline come out, it said 5 was killed, but actually it was 6 in the end that ended up dying. And it was a horrific accident, if you will. We had 6 killed, 10 injured, 1 dog killed and 1 uninjured, who ended up being arrested, who was the driver of the car that caused the accident. We had lots of law enforcement and fire departments and ambulances and everything there. It was a major incident, and we had a slow-moving vehicle, large farm tractor that was on its way down a county road, going to a field to spray. So it had the large spray rig onto it, and an individual named Eldridge and a Oldsmobile was headed down the road, coming up behind this tractor. And there was a passenger caravan that ironically had 14 Amish folks in it that were out visiting farms in the area, traveling up the road. And this Eldridge decided that he had to pass this slow-moving vehicle tractor on a double solid line on a curve at an intersection, believe it or not. And when he did so, he went out around the tractor and struck the van in the middle of the intersection, and then went off the highway to the right. The van then continued on and struck the slow-moving vehicle tractor head-on almost. And one of the first pictures taken at the scene was we had 14 people trapped inside. A dog was trapped in there, and many were forced on top of each other. It was a horrific scene, if you will. We tried to do initial assessment on what we really had and what our concerns were, and again, this tractor was right on top of the van. We could hear people screaming and what have you in there, and that's what it looked like from this side. And again, we had hands sticking out, and we had to put wedges because it started to tip over the embankment. We had to hook up a fire truck with a chain onto it. This is the Eldridge car that passed and then struck the van, and you can see where that ended up down the road. The first deputy on the scene on this particular accident ended up dealing with this individual who obviously was impaired. And you can see the damage caused and the impact caused to that vehicle, and he was running a donut type of tire on the one front end there. There's the point of impact. This was in the northbound lane, and again, the tractor was coming south, and the other end of Eldridge was coming south, passing, and you can see how far over into that lane he hit the van, which drove the van over beyond that fire truck and right into the tractor. And so that's what we were faced as when we got there. A couple of the Amish got out, but the 11 of them were trapped inside the vehicle. And then we were concerned about a hazmat incident because this tractor was full of spray, but that was a concern. We had to get the people in for that. If they had to cut the roof off, chain it up because it started to fall over and tip over, and we were concerned about our first responders. We actually had to hook a tow truck to the tractor itself to hold it up as we start to try to get people out from inside who are on top of each other, some alive, some dead. How often do you see 3 medevac helicopters in a bean field adjacent to the accident scene? And the multiple people involved in the rescue and trying to remove was horrific. One of the things we also found out was we realized that the TV crews had arrived and were really a half a mile down the road, literally a half a mile, but those TV cameras can reach out so far that when we were pulling the dead people off the accident scene, we had to set up a barrier to try to protect their dignity. And so that was what this picture was that you're looking at, something to be aware of when cameras get on the scene. We used our total station to document the whole scene itself, but I can tell you this, that I put this picture into the right. This is a instrument made by Eltron Company, and it's called a 360 camera. And we have purchased one of those late last year, and we use this exclusively to document accident scenes, major accident scenes, and to document crime scenes as well. It's such a simple device, an affordable device that does a wonderful job in documenting the whole complete scene. At the same time, we're now using a drone with a camera that we send up to photograph the major accident scenes from the air as well. Going back to this Eldridge, the one thing we ended up charging him with vehicular homicide. The test came back that he had cocaine in his system. He had done it. He had done a line of cocaine about an hour before the accident, and so driving under the influence of drugs. And then he got 25 years sentence for that particular accident. And again, although an SMV was involved, it kind of showed the synergy that existed between fire, EMS, and police. As the EMS folks did their triage and law enforcement discussed the investigation, and the fire department personnel were doing the removal. This is kind of an interesting slide I put together to demonstrate the number of entities that have to come together for some kind of an event like this. You've got folks out visiting farms. These 3 vehicles meet each other, and it caused a major critical incident, mass casualty incident, MCI event as we call it. You have an investigation by law enforcement. You've got 911 involved with the calls. You've got an arrest. You've got fire and rescue, tow trucks, traffic control. And one of the things, having 6 people killed, we had to set up a temporary morgue and to hold the bodies. Identification was really a challenge. Remember, these were all Amish folks that had died within this accident, and they do not have any identification on them. And so we had really a challenge to get folks in from 50 miles away from where they were from to do identification of these bodies, and so that was challenging as well, and then dealing with the media and what have you. But one event like this can certainly cause many folks to come together. Now, again, I want to emphasize that 80% of these slow-moving vehicles are struck from behind, and usually by a vehicle driven too close or too fast for the conditions. And so the law on following too closely is more closely than reasonable and prudent, having due regard for speed and traffic and the conditions of the highway. Speed not reasonable, maybe called something else in another state, but it's driving at an appropriate reduced speed depending upon the conditions, and whatever those special hazards that may exist is something that I think is very important to make reference to. Now, on this fatal accident that I just talked about, there were actual and potential hazards then existing prior to that event. What did that operator see? That operator saw signs and the pavement markings which controlled and warned and guided traffic. He ignored the 45 miles an hour recommended sign and a curve and an intersection sign. He ignored the double passing lines. And there was a SMV symbol on the back of the tractor. Those were all there, and they all were relevant in our case against him. And again, I come back to this slide that we talked about in the first place. I think the posting of these yellow warning signs as traffic control devices is one of the best things I can recommend that you do within your community, where you have areas that have a lot of farm tractor traffic, or areas that have a lot of bicycle traffic, or areas where you have horse and buggies using the highways, because they all have to share the road. Now, these particular signs can be very beneficial, especially when it comes to your investigation of the incident. Now, if you had one of these signs posted prior to the accident event, if you will, then you can use that to help bolster your case that someone was driving recklessly or speed not reasonable, prudent, what have you, because of special conditions that existed, because that warning sign was posted there for a reason. We have tried to have a campaign where we post these bicycle signs nearby Mennonite or schools, where these schools are located, because there's usually a lot of bicycle traffic. We've tried to locate these horse and buggy signage near churches and other roads, county town roads, where there's a lot of this type of traffic. And again, if someone passes by one of these warning signs and so forth, you can use that in your investigation, because they're there to regulate and warn traffic. So I would put a lot of emphasis on having those things out. If your highway departments can help you in that regard, they really help bolster your case. As we culminate, the message that I have here regarding sharing the road is rural roads especially will see a lot of farm tractors and agricultural equipment and horse-drawn buggies and bicycles and other such traffic. Rural roads usually are not as wide as other roads. Sometimes there's loose gravel. There can be blind hills and turns. You have to be very aware of that. When these roadways also include slow-moving vehicle hazards exist, and they can be very challenging to motorists that don't recognize the fact that they have to use caution in these areas. The annual deaths and serious injury involving slow-moving vehicles, according to all the statistics that I can find, and according to what I can find with NHTSA, is they seem to be increasing. And so it is a trend that I'm very concerned about. Motorists will generally encounter more slow-moving vehicles May to October during planting and harvest season. And I think that's important to understand. And again, with that time, Mennonite horse-drawn buggies and bicycles are generally traveling Saturdays and Sundays, including a lot of evenings. I talked about the sing events on Saturdays and Saturday nights, and of course going to church on Sundays. Traffic units that travel less than 25 miles an hour must have that SMV emblem affixed, and the SMV emblem must be displayed on all equipment, not just the farm tractor, but any equipment, ag equipment attached to the tractor must have that sign on as well. Motorists must recognize this symbol and know the closure times, that slide about coming up from behind. Educate our new drivers about SMVs. If you get the opportunity to talk to driver's ed classes or whatever, talk about SMVs, because otherwise there's not a lot of education out there for them to understand they must share the road. And again, we can do our best for safety, but when it comes to slow-moving vehicles, we really have to do what's required of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. And again, we have come to another question and answer period. You can put any questions into the chat pod on the left-hand side. We do have one final poll question for you all, and then we'll close up the webinar. Our question is, in many SMV crashes, the vehicular driver can be charged with following too closely or speed not reasonable and prudent, and having advisory signs in the area will help corroborate the charges. True or false? I don't know, or I don't remember. And Sheriff, while people are answering that question, we do have a few thoughts in the chat pod for you. The first one says, in Ohio, on the descending side of the hill, they've created extra wide shoulders for the animal-drawn vehicles to be out of the way of traffic descending the hill. Also, we have worked with Amish and English farmers on the driveway placement to give motor vehicles more sight distance before seeing the equipment on the roadway. So that's a great comment, and I know someone had asked earlier about the engineering type countermeasures that could possibly be put in place. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Okay.
We also have another question for you or comment that says, here at the National Farm Medicine Center, we're in the process of revising our public online data capturing system for agricultural incidents. Per your suggestion, I've put in the request for a SMV data point.
Yes, I greatly appreciate that. Sometimes getting these accident reports that are required by law enforcement to fill out, sometimes just a simple box can make a big difference on better statistical data, especially with this particular SMV issue.
Another great comment and potential countermeasure that others can use is one that's in the comment box. It says, we have also given Amish elders a ride in our motor vehicles, both in the daylight and at night. For many of these people, it is the first time they have seen the animal-drawn vehicle on the roadway from our perspective. And also note that because they typically don't ride in motor vehicles, they have no understanding of the closure distance.
Well, that's a great suggestion that they experience that. The closure times are so happen so fast. As I said, the average horse and buggy is moving 7 to 10 miles an hour at best, and that may be on a straightway. A lot of times they're climbing hills and going much slower. But again, as we said, it's about 5.5 to 6 seconds of closure time for 400 feet for a vehicle traveling 55 miles an hour. So getting them to understand how important it is to at least be over as far to the right as they can be too when they're traveling down the roads can make a difference on someone else avoiding hitting them.
Because we are running a couple minutes over time, I am just going to let everyone know that 100% of you did get the poll question right, so we won't address that one any further. I am going to ask, rather, Sheriff, the next couple of questions instead to make sure we get those answers for you. Someone asked, just wondering, does weather have a factor like snow, fog, or dust?
We haven't seen that in the statistics that we've been able to come up with. That I've been able to find. I haven't found that that's an issue. 84% of the accidents that happen, especially with a horse and buggy, there was no adverse weather conditions at all that were in existence at the time. And again, most of them are happening during daylight hours on straight roads and rear-end collisions, and usually someone is following too close or traveling at a speed not reasonable and prudent based upon the conditions. Either you come over a hill or around a curve or what have you and strike the buggy in the rear. But 84% there was no adverse weather conditions. Good question.
Another question that came in for you was that since I assume you are doing all of the things you're discussing but still have an increase in crash rate, it seems like other countermeasures might also be appropriate. Are there any plans to do something different from your current strategies?
Well, we certainly don't have all the warning signs out that we'd like to have, but we do have quite a few out in the community, and we have to continue with the education of our not only of all drivers really, and I'm really looking now to maybe do some things if I can get the money for billboards and things that will get attention of that way. I think as far as the operators of these vehicles go that are following too close, they're traveling too fast, what have you, that enforcement is certainly something that we have to increase. We just can't give a pass on things like this, and it holds true with the clans of buggy operators or tractor operators that do not want to put these slow-moving vehicle emblems on, or some other type of warning reflector or lantern, what have you, that absolutely refuse. Then I have, and you can't work it out with the bishop, I think you've got to resort to law enforcement enforcing the law. And I mentioned that money is something that they're very conservative with and very tight about. And if they have to start paying fines and that type of thing, it will get their attention. I remember 30 years ago when this old order Mennonites and Amish started to move into our area, that we had to go out and start to educate them on the slow-moving vehicle emblem to have it on. They didn't want to put it on. And we ended up, I'm talking 30 years ago now, writing a couple of tickets, traffic tickets to individuals, and that got their attention. They did not want to pay those fines, and so they put the signs on. So enforcement is a very important part of this issue.
Absolutely, and we've also had a couple comments come in, the education outreach as well as the enforcement too, and that education being both to motorists and to SMV operators. And Allegheny County has put in a comment in here to let you know that the Amish Mobility Safety Advisory Board is currently working on outreach and education in the southern tier of New York State. So
yes, I'm familiar with Allegheny County's efforts with that Safety Advisory Board, and kudos to them for outreach and education in the southern tier of our state here. I certainly appreciate all they're doing, and they recognize that this is an issue.
We have one final question for you, and then I will close out the webinar. And that question is, with the static yellow signs, would it be more effective if they had flashing beacons on them, or if perhaps they were made into dynamic warning signs or dynamic message signs?
Well, I don't know. Every state has different laws regarding these flashing beacons. We've had really challenge here to allow our state to allow us to have areas that would have a flashing beacon light at places, especially where traffic gets congested and what have you. We haven't been successful in our Department of Motor Vehicles recognizing that that's a solution. It obviously, when you have had issues, especially in a school zone or places like that where you demand that traffic must slow down, then they will allow flashing yellow lights in those particular areas to get drivers' attention. So finding those types of things out in our rural areas is not something easily to get them to erect. You have a better luck getting those things put up within a incorporated village or city.
Well, I do want to wrap up our webinar at this point, and I want to thank the Sheriff very much again. We greatly appreciate him taking the time today to speak with our audience. I think it's been a fabulous webinar, and I'm very excited that it will be archived and available on our website for others to watch as well in the future. So thank you very much, Sheriff.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
So just for a few notes for everybody else on the webinar, our upcoming webinars, our May topic is still to be announced. We're still working with our upcoming speakers on that one. We'll send that out to our distribution list as soon as we do have it finalized. Our June webinar will be Rural Intersection Safety and Countermeasures. We'll have a guest speaker from FHWA speaking about that. In July, we'll have another FHWA speaker talking about roundabouts. And in August, we'll have a final FHWA speaker talking about designing for rural bike safety. Later this fall, we do also plan to have a webinar on elderly drivers. And we will also be tackling the topics of rural intelligent transportation systems and the Road to Zero program. As anytime, if you guys do have suggestions for webinar topics, please email me at info at ruralsafetycenter.org and let me know. The center will be closing next May, and so we are wrapping up our final webinar topics. So if you do have any that we haven't covered so far that you would like to see before we close, please let me know so I can get those scheduled for you. Also, lastly, we are having our second Rural Safety Summit. It's coming up this December. It will be the first week in December in Savannah, Georgia, and we would love to have all of you there. We will be having 2 days worth of trainings as well as a day of summit, and this will be a follow-up to our 2016 summit that we held in Denver, Colorado. Again, we will be sending out more information through our distribution list, and there is additional information on our website. So thank you again to Sheriff Spike. We do appreciate you taking your time today. And if anyone has further questions for him, you can contact him at the email that's now showing on the screen or contact us at the Safety Center and we can put you in touch with them. So thank you everyone and have a great day.